we were talking about Mike Schrepfer's really interesting comments this morning about speeding up the pace of the rollout of new sustainable physical infrastructure. Yep. And you had a thought about that.
Yeah, I think Mike mentioned the need at 10x over the next 10 years, that we're going to need 10x more physical infrastructure. And I agree, and I think he made the point that there's a sort of misperception that we don't know how to build things anymore. I would say what we also need is the 10x social and community engagement scale up to go along with that infrastructure build up. And that it's not that we don't know how to build things, it's that we don't know how to get them accepted with a social license to operate, with the support to get them cited, permitted, approved. And so we need to keep that in mind as we're thinking about this opportunity to roll out at scale.
Yeah, and we're calling this session Innovation After the Biden Bills, which was a very deliberate choice because we are in a new environment,
yep,
thanks to some really incredible leadership by President Biden. I think that's really undeniable. But one of your colleagues, I think on one of the prep calls, said, yeah, it's like the dog finally caught the car.
It's true.
Now we don't know what
now
to
what?
do. Yeah, so how do you think about that? How does EDF think about that?
So first I want to just share with you a little tidbit that I heard from the White House. They preferred that the bills be called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law Bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA. So I think of my uncles at Thanksgiving, Bill and Ira being around the table. That's the opportunity that we have to talk about. So what I think these bills did was really send the strong market signal that this is a long-term, stable investment in the sectors that are going to help us pivot to the clean energy economy of the future. And it's our chance now to take that track work that's been laid and really make sure that we have the community engagement and the inclusive processes to have a durable and lasting change. And so that means getting busy, rolling up our sleeves, and really trying to understand what does it take to take full advantage of this incredible funding opportunity. And just to give you a little bit of color, we're talking, the Congressional Budget Office scored about $500 billion in funding across Bill, IRA, CHIPS, $500 billion for climate over the next 10 years. And already we're thinking that's probably a bit conservative. And some analysis shows with the value of the tax credits and tax financing, it's probably closer to $800 billion.
The value of the amount that actually has been committed.
That has been committed, that
Wow.
will be coming out, reaching the street. And I'm sure many of you saw the article in Atlantic citing a Credit Suisse report that pegs the economic impact at closer to $1.7 trillion over the next decade. So this is pretty substantial money. And this has been a sector that hasn't had that kind of stable commitment and market conditions to allow all of the innovation to take place. It's been a very start-stop sector. And so what I think the opportunity is to get right is to seize this moment to bring together private sector, advocates, government at every level. There's a huge play for the federal government to get the rules set up right. And then there's going to be an enormous opportunity to make sure that states and local government and communities are part of co-designing, collaborating, being a part of building what we want to see as we make this pivot economic-wide. And so the opportunity now is to really focus on implementation and to make sure that we are learning from what hasn't worked well in the past or what we've ignored in the past. And so I know several folks have made the comment that this is not the time to go fast and break things. And I think that's really true. I think I don't have to tell this audience how urgent action is, how narrow a window we have to stave off the worst case scenarios. We really have to take advantage of this opportunity. And the models show that if we get implementation right, and of IRA alone, that we could get to 40% emissions reductions by 2030. The target's 50%, so we still have more to do, but we get a huge down payment from this opportunity if we can get implementation right and lasting.
So what should we be thinking of trying to do differently now? We collectively,
Yep.
and particularly business, since this is a heavily business audience, what do you want us to be thinking about that we might not already be thinking about?
Sure. So I think finding ways to engage in the messy part of community engagement on the front end. So this is not an opportunity to build scooters and drop them in a city and hope City Hall wants them, or to take an Airbnb or an Uber approach and sort of build the demand and then come for the blessing. This is really the inverse, a need to engage in the beginning, at the beginning of the cycle, so that you have the support to get across the finish line and actually get it built. As I said, it doesn't matter if you have the smartest technology, the most innovative, disruptive solution, if you can't get it sited, permitted, and approved, it doesn't help us in this race, and time is of the essence. And so I think using all of our collective thinking, all of our different organizational hats to make the space to engage with communities, to build an inclusive process on the front end so that there's truly durable demand for what it is what we're trying to build. I think that's the best way I can see to go forward.
Well, coming from you and others at this event, we've heard a lot about the need to kind of do it all at once,
right,
including inclusion, equity, fighting against inequality. But that's hard to really do,
really
right?
Hard.
And so institutionally, what, as individual activists in business, in nonprofits, even yourself, what do you plan to do differently? What should I as a journalist be doing?
Right.
Talk a little more about concretely for all of us in our fields, what should we be doing differently if this massive amount of money has now been bequeathed to climate action in the United States, but we've got to integrate communities with that in new ways.
Right.
What do we do differently?
So I think the White House said that 90% of the funds will flow through the feds, but the decisions get made at the state, tribal, local levels of government. So I think anything that we can do to support engagement, participation, awareness, sort of de-wonking, getting the story out there.
That's a great word.
It's something I need to work on personally. Getting out of the weeds and really setting the table for what's possible. So I think there's a real opportunity to shift the narrative from alarmist, urgent, the clock is running out, although it is. I think we have found that people have had just about all the negative messaging that they can take and do anything constructive with.
Yeah.
And we start to pivot to a conversation that's more forward-looking about what we get if we're successful at this. If we do implement and we do what the science tells us staves off the worst case scenarios, what else do you get in terms of community infrastructure, recreation opportunities, quality of life improvements? How do we make this conversation one about positive investment in what we want to see, in the future we want to see? And that happens at every level. And so I think anything that you can do and that I can do to help prepare people for what's coming, to help spread the word. One specific example, the Clean School Bus Rebate Program that EPA just announced the funding decisions about a week or two ago. They had $500 million set aside for this first year. They were sort of treating it as a trial balloon. And through great organizing efforts, including a close partner of EDF, Moms Clean Air Force, there was a prioritized district list that came up from a variety of criteria, population, rural counties, percent school federal lunch program, those kinds of things, where there was a prioritized applicant list. And our colleagues at Moms Clean Air Force called every school district in the states where they work to make sure that they knew that they were part of this prioritized
They were eligible,
list.
but they had to apply
eligible,
for it.
They had to apply. What help do you need to apply? And as a result of Moms and others, that program was hugely oversubscribed to the point that EPA doubled the money available in the first year. They've allocated $1 billion this first year,
wow,
and there will be another $1 billion for the next 4 years to convert school bus fleets to electric buses. And so I think that kind of sort of breaking it down, making it accessible, showcasing the intervention points, highlighting the opportunities, that's a way we're going to get people knowledgeable and invested, and hopefully that snowballs. And keeps that activity and that participation going. I think that's how we do it.
To be clear, before EDF and Moms
Clean Air Force.
Clean Air Force got involved, there was a serious concern that there wouldn't be even enough applicants, right?
It's true. Yep. And luckily, as you are able to spread the word about the opportunity and get really concrete about what steps need to be taken, even school districts who are trying to keep people in school in this COVID environment, are willing to take that long-term investment in cleaner transportation. We know it has myriad public health benefits, not just for the students riding the buses, but the surrounding communities.
Let me ask you a question I meant to ask earlier, but you've sort of gotten closer to it in some of the things you're saying. I meant to ask you to characterize where we are in climate action overall. How do we think about where we stand right now as a planet, really?
David's giving me this chance because he stole my line in the opening session, so I'm going to repurpose it here. We've been on a long, grinding bike ride. We've been chugging away. We've put in a lot of work, and we are at the base of a huge hill, possibly the biggest hill we've ever seen. But we know that at the top of that hill, there's the most beautiful valley. We're going to have the best view. It's so worth it. But we've got to take all of the effort that we can to make this last push. And I think with the ground that's been laid by these unbelievable investments, we're going to start to see catalytic work. We're already seeing it in the automotive industry with all of the factories that have been announced that are onshoring production of electric vehicles, of the battery belt that's reemerging in the Midwest and the Southeast, that's producing the component parts required to take advantage of these incentives. We're seeing the snowball effect. So if we can trudge up the hill, I think we're gonna get to a point where this has that positive reinforcement and makes it easier to coast, makes it easier to innovate as we go down. But I think we're at the bottom of a last really hard climb.
But the key part is there is a beautiful future out there.
Absolutely.
It's not like a scary thing. We've all got to cower because the climate is ending, right?
Exactly.
That's a different way of thinking and talking about the climate crisis than we've really had up to now.
Well, and we finally did what it took to put the U.S. on the map and in the leadership position we know that we can be. And we're poised to be an energy leader globally now. And it's time to really deliver on the commitments we've made. And that's going to get us to that verdant valley, optimistic future that we'd rather have than the alternative.
And under Trump and even in the many decades, the U.S. has not been the leader that it needed to be, given the fact that we've produced 25% of all the carbon that's in the air right now. And other countries have said, why should we do it? You're not even doing it.
Right.
Is this going to be catalytic globally, do you think, to allow us, not just to have the high ground, but people to no longer excuse themselves because if the U.S. isn't doing it, why should they?
So I think it definitely erodes that earned criticism. We have to deliver. So we're still in the commitment phase. So tomorrow is actually the 1-year anniversary of the signing of the bipartisan infrastructure law. IRA passed in August, so this is all fresh. And we have a lot of work to do to work out the rules and to set up the parameters or the guardrails and to actually get the investments out the door and making impacts on emissions reductions. So I do think we still have a little bit of demonstration required before that criticism is totally invalid. But to hear various sectors talk about it, absolutely this is going to have global impact. It's going to create an innovation race in energy, in transportation, in battery storage, in skilled workforce, and who's going to take advantage of all of these opportunities, and how do we capture as much of that benefit in communities as possible. But I certainly think this is the beginning of the U.S. sort of returning to its powerful role of doing what we are asking others to do as well.
I don't know if you want to or can answer this, but I just we heard just today that Biden and Xi Jinping had a 3-hour meeting,
right,
which is a major positive because really communications between the two countries had shut down, and they agreed to resume a lot of form of communications.
I think Biden said we don't have to have a Cold War, which is a relief.
I hope Xi said that too. Do you think that could basically help us with climate cooperation with China? Have you picked that up already in the few hours since that happened?
I think it's possible, and certainly having, to your earlier question, if the U.S. and China are both making commitments, that really narrows the wiggle room for anyone else to lag behind.
Yeah.
I think it remains to be seen. I think there is an element of supporting U.S. manufacturing that certainly the China context is a part of that, and wanting to make sure, from whether it's security or resilience, that we have the capacity and the facilities to make what we need. And I think that'll be interesting to see how that space develops and how it can be sort of positive competition that helps the U.S. economy and U.S. communities, and not scary, jingoistic rhetoric about, like the Cold War.
Yeah. Think of questions. I'm going to ask for your questions in just a second, but I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about EDF itself, because even as I was asking you the question about the school bus thing, I was thinking it takes a fairly sophisticated, really plugged-in organization to have figured out and to have the connections to know that EPA needed a little help to get people to apply for this $500 million to electrify school buses. EDF is a very unusual organization. It's been around a long time. It has enormous depth of learning. So tell us, how should we think about it as an organization in the environmental movement?
So EDF is a very interesting place to be a part of. I describe it as, a group that is informed by science, but motivated by action. And so there is policy engagement, there is implementation engagement at every level of governments in the US and internationally. And where they are intervening is backed by science, by telling us what's going to have the greatest impact on emissions reduction, what's going to have the best impact on water quality, soil health, whatever the case may be. And it's an organization that is both issue-specific experts and place-based experts. And so I'm working with the state affairs team, which in the US, which is looking at 13 states to really dive deeply, where we have staff on the ground that are tied into communities, that are connected into local governments, that are able to say, okay, in the state of Louisiana, this is what it's going to take to get action on climate, on resilience, on water.
And to use the IRA money.
And to use the money. And so, as you can imagine, there is a capacity deficit across every level of government right now. This has sort of been year after year after year of stretched thin. And we are seeing an incredible infusion of budget resources. So EPA is receiving 7 times what it's ever received before in IRA.
I mean, in terms of total budget?
Total budget.
7 times?
7 times.
Oh my God, I didn't hear that.
And it was hollowed out under the last administration. So there's a real capacity need to help EPA figure out how to do this in a way that is encouraging to innovation, that does open space for collaboration, that allows for community engagement. So EDF plays a really important role in that space on the federal side of getting the rules set up and getting the information out there. And then the next layer is the money goes to states. And so how do the states think about this? And how do you have fairly capacity-strapped state governments think creatively and in ways that cut across program silos, holistically thinking about these problems? So there's a real need for EDF to engage there at the state level, and that's what we're doing in these 13 states. And then that gives the space for community processes and for community wishes. And if you are working, my colleague who's the director of our Louisiana office, works very closely with community groups in Cancer Alley and knows that air quality monitoring is one important piece of it, but it's not the thing that speaks to people that live there. They hear that as, you don't believe me that the air quality is bad, and I'm telling you it's bad. And so being able to pair with an investment in a community block grant or in spending that meets the community where they want to go, but also has that scientific basis of the air quality monitoring that then becomes an enforcement action. That's the kind of sort of bringing together of the different funding streams EDF's able to do throughout the system.
That's impressive. Okay, we have time for one question. Do I have a question? Anybody? Okay.
I covered it all.
No, you didn't. You're good, but you didn't cover it all.
Hi, I was just wondering, of course, given the bipartisan success of these bills, but I was wondering if you could just talk about if there's any concern that if the next administration is not Biden's, will these things get gutted again? As you said, It's very up and down, and also just in general, a growing percentage of the other voter base becoming climate deniers. And
Great question. Thank you for asking that.
So I'll start by saying it wasn't even the next administration we were worried about. It was last Tuesday. So this is a very real challenge, and I suspect there's been some analysis that shows that red states will benefit the most from these investments, both because they've sort of done the least on their own and because of where energy infrastructure is in this country. So my hope is, with a little bit of time to get started, we're going to start to have enough success that it makes it, not very attractive to change, to roll back these incentives, to have companies that have already made announcements to work with the private sector, that if we can get going and we can be singing the successes as we go, knowing we have to learn as we go, that it will start to make that impenetrable and protect in somewhat the way that Obamacare was. And that it may be a talking point, but not an actual move to roll back.
And all the more reason to be working in places like Louisiana right now.
Yep.
Yeah, I read that book, Strangers in Their Own Land.
Yep.
If anybody hasn't read it, that is an amazing book to understand what's happening in America, and it's set in Louisiana. Kristin, you're great. I can see why EDF wanted you to be the one to come here.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for
Appreciate
being
it.
here.
Thanks for having me.